Hey everybody, welcome back to Pristine Podcast. My name is Lero, and in this video we're going to talk about Podfade, what it is and how to avoid it. First, let's talk about what Podfade means. Podfade means that your show stops producing content. This could be gradual, where the production frequency decreases to the point where it stops, or it could be just instant, where the show production just ends and everything related to the podcast itself. So let's talk about why does it occur? Why is there such a term as Podfade? Why does it exist? The first and most obvious reason is lack of time. In fact, there is a ratio of 4:1 when it comes to producing podcast content, which means it takes 4 times the amount of effort to produce 1 minute of quality podcast content, which just goes to show how much time investment does it take to produce quality podcast content. Every single podcast episode, from recording to editing to publishing, takes a lot of time, and then after you're done, you're not done basically, because you also have to advertise it on your social media, so you have to promote it. All this time needs to be found somewhere, so you need to do some calculations to see whether you have enough time to dispose to doing all this, to make all this happen. And you should also keep in mind that in the first few months to up to a year, all this work is going to be free. You're not going to get paid most likely, so it's worth to think about whether it's a good deal to put all this time for nothing, at least for the first few months. Now, I would advise you to continue if it's meant to help a lot of people, or if it is your passion. If it's both combined, best of both worlds, why not? A no-brainer. However, if it's not either of these two, then you have to consider this. You have to think about, is it worth the investment, to put in all this time into it, and then potentially for it to have no results, and then weighing it up should bring some sort of resolution in your brain. The second reason that it might occur is that there might not be enough content in your niche to keep the show alive in the future. When people have a podcast idea, they're quick to bring it to life and start recording. However, by episode 5, they're like, okay, now what? What do we talk about? Because they've run out of ideas. Especially if you're in such a small niche with very, very little search volume, you might have trouble finding new episodes. To give you a first-hand example, us at Pristine Podcasts, we had to go through those initial stages where we had to plan for our future episodes, which topics we're going to cover. Now, even though the format that we produce is video and we're publishing it in YouTube, it's not a podcast, but it might be repurposed in a podcast in the future. So if, in case you're listening to this, that's what happened. So yeah, we had to go through those initial stages, and with a very quick research, we came up with 150 topics we could talk about to help you guys to create great podcast content. Which was a sign that it is a niche, it is a topic that's worth talking about, that's worth helping people out, again, to create this great content and to also help them out with editing and post-production. Reason number 3 is lack of preparation. When people start their podcast, they invest lots of money into fancy equipment because they believe that nowadays, where everybody else has got a strong game when it comes to this, you need to have the best mic in the world to sound decent so that people can bear listening to you. But they forget that the key is to lay a strong basis, basically, to lay the strong foundation to create the great content that people are going to hear. And yes, it's true that the more you do it, the easier it will become to produce podcast content, but coming up with this original stuff to create things from scratch for years to come in the future is a lot of work. And this lack of material can turn podcasting from feeling fun to feeling like doing work, and this always leads to podfading. The fourth reason why podfading might happen is lack of listeners. The typical download range for an average podcast is 170, and if you're below this number, you might feel like you have a lack of audience. With the right content, you can easily reach hundreds and even thousands of downloads, and this will help you going and literally like going to a podcast event, or to go to those kinds of audiences where you can reach your target audience, be able to collaborate, therefore growing your audience. Reason number 5 is life-changing events. These events, most of them are not in your hand. This can just happen just like that, and they can affect your posting schedule, which can lead to podfade. Having babies, the death of someone, these are things that can shift your focus and change the way that you prioritize things, and as a consequence, you might not enjoy making podcast content anymore, But instead of closing it, you just tell your audience that, hey, I'm taking a break, and then once you're done with your break, and you still don't like doing podcast content, you can bring a closure to this chapter by making a farewell episode. And you can tell your audience like, hey, I've thought about this and it's time to end the podcast, because there might be fans that were looking forward to hearing from you, so you shouldn't disappoint people. This can leave your possibilities open in the internet world to come back with dignity, to come back in a different format or doing something else that involves being public. If you're finding this information helpful and you want more podcasting tips in the future, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can get notified in the future whenever we upload new videos. Now let's talk about how to avoid this evil thing called Podfade. How can we not let it become part of our own podcast? Well, what you can do is come up with a proper schedule. As we talked about it earlier, there is a lot of work that needs to go into it. There's from editing it to publishing it to social media and all of that, it takes a lot. So coming up with a proper schedule that applies to your life, and doesn't interfere with your daily routines is a great way to start. It isn't even necessary to post every week. You can post once every 2 weeks or once every 3 weeks or once a month. As long as your audience knows that and they're used to that, they will be on the edge waiting for your next episode to launch. Also try to find ways that may optimize the time that you need to make one episode happen. This could be from reducing the length of one episode to hiring someone else like us to take off the load for you to help edit your podcast and to do all the show notes and all the back end stuff that needs to happen. The second thing you can do to eliminate Podfade is to lock down on your niche. This will make sure that you don't go too broad on lots of other topics that don't relate to what you're talking about, and to also not be too narrow. This will just be sure that you have a predictable amount of content you can talk and a predictable range as well. Also, if you have a broad niche, you may be very overwhelmed by all the topics you can cover. You may get tired, you may be like, okay, I could talk about this or that and end up choosing nothing. Or if you have a very small niche, a very thin niche, you could scrape for things to talk about. It may be very difficult to find something, or you may recycle lots of old content in the past, so it may be demotivating. So you can instead spend some time on honing down what your niche is, which will get you on a clear direction to get there with concentrated content that is meant for it. The third way is get prepared. Preparation always pays out at the end, so try to learn as much as you can about your niche. In fact, we have a digital product for you called the Podcast Launch Pathway, which you can find in the description, which will help you start your podcast on the right foot and tell you all the things that you need to know about starting it. You can put in this preparation to learn all there is to know about recording and editing software so that you become super efficient editing them from home. Otherwise, when you get hit with all these technical details, you'll get overwhelmed and most likely you're going to stop recording. With the right plan, you'll have so many content, preferably in batch, like in the beginning before you start, like 20 episodes, launching straight away with amazing content that will make you stand out and get you motivated to continue doing it. The fourth way is to not compare your podcast with others. Checking other podcasts' download numbers and checking their reviews and all that great stuff is going to make you feel bad and frustrated. You may think that those other podcasters started just at the right time. They caught the moment. They're getting all these amazing sponsors now, and you may be like, "What about me?" Well, focus on creating great podcast content with the genuine intent to help people, and you should be sure that with your unique character, you're going to get your follow base that like you and what you have to say. And finally, the fifth and final way to not meet this terrible thing called Podfade in person is to not lose our passion when it comes to podcasting. And in fact, there is ways that we can maintain the same levels of passion towards podcasting as the day we started publishing. The main thing to be doing is to never stop learning new things about your industry and your niche, but then also to listen to other podcasters that are in the same niche as you are, especially if there's an overlap with motivational podcasts as well. This way you'll always be excited about new updates in the industry and always have that burning desire to be the expert in your industry. If you want to grow your podcast faster and get more of your time back, then consider outsourcing podcast editing and post-production to me and my team. To learn more, check out the link in the description. And as always, if you've enjoyed these tips, then don't forget to press the thumbs up and subscribe button for more podcast related content in the future. I'll see you again in the next video.